Welcome to the Q-MindBody podcast. My name is Darren Main, and in this podcast, we talk about wellness and spirituality and self-inquiry for gay men. Now, a lot of times I focus on physical health and wellness, but today I'm going to take a departure, a little bit of a different turn. And that is, we're going to talk about gay stories and how representation in books and media is really important for us to just see ourselves from different angles and sometimes reframe our past experiences, especially around coming out and some of the more challenging parts of being a young gay man, especially if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So recently, I read a wonderful book called Together in a Broken World by Paul Michael Winters. He's going to be my guest today, and we're going to talk about his writing process, about the book a little bit, and about how books like his can maybe help you to grow a little bit and have some fun in the process. So I will put his website along with mine. pmwinters.com is his website. I will post that in the show notes along with information on how you can get his book and contact him if you'd like. His book is Together in a Broken World, and then later in 2025, The Haunting Between Us, which I'm already super excited for. And I will also put information on upcoming gay men's gatherings and events, yoga classes, and chat groups that we have online and in the real world. So be sure to follow that and connect with us on Gay Wellness, which is a website that is helping to support this podcast. Okay, all that out of the way, let's bring in Paul Michael Winters. Paul, welcome.
Hello, nice to be here.
It is so good to see you and to chat with you. And I just have to tell people, I I listened to the audiobook version of your book, and I love I love fiction. Just I love stories in general. I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan. But I know somebody hits it right when I find myself like sitting in my car in front of my house and just to get to the end of the chapter. And your book was like that. It's just such an amazing, fun, insightful story. And it just brought me back to, well, not all of it. A viral apocalypse, I could do without that. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you decided to sit down and start writing, and specifically writing young adult young adult fiction for gay men.
yeah, absolutely. I've been a lifelong creative writer, but I took a really long break and worked in the tech industry for the majority of my adult career. But I was always kind of close to writing. I enjoyed reading. But what kind of really transformed it is when, honestly, the movie Love, Simon, which is based on Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. When I saw that in the theaters, I just had no idea that queer fiction had come so far. And so I started reading that and just started voraciously reading lots of queer fiction, both young adult, which is great, and also adult. And then when I saw Heartstopper, funny that TV shows kind of inspired it. I just really realized that kind of the power of queer joy and queer stories that don't necessarily focus on people's sexuality. It's just an aspect of them. And that's really kind of what lit the fire under me to not only just get back into writing, but to really focus on stories that were about, queer people
Yeah.
living their best lives. So,
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up both of those because both of those, the film and then the book and then the Heartstopper, like I love that, and it got like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, so
yeah.
it clearly tapped into something important. Um, And I like what you just said about a story that so many gay stories, especially like I remember seeing Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington and Antonio Banderas in Philadelphia, which was a
Mm.
phenomenal movie, and it told an important story about the AIDS crisis. But it was also just tragedy. Gay men, I think we started to associate ourselves with tragic circumstances. We were bullied, we were gay bashed, we had to deal with AIDS, and those are all important stories. But to move beyond that and say being gay can be this joyful experience of falling in love and intimacy and supporting each other and all of that. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just to add on to that, you know, not only, I mean, those stories are still critically important and they still need to happen, but it's also very important to leave some space for, like you say, the happy stories. And I think those are
yeah,
both good for gay people, as well as straight people. I have lots of straight readers that love my stories, and I think it,
yeah,
can show straight people like, here's what a normal gay life could be like. Obviously our sexuality is part of our selves, but it's not our whole selves. So
yeah. Well, I want to dive into your book a little bit, but I want to frame this not
sure.
just first, I don't want to give any spoilers because there's a lot that happens in the book that a
Mhm.
big part of the fun of reading it is like, what's going to happen next? How are they going to get out of this issue? But just generally, could you say what the current book is about, Together in a Broken World? However much you want to share. And then
Yeah,
I'd like to
sure.
tease out
Well,
some of the main themes.
yeah, well, its plot is about, a viral apocalypse that has, decimated the world's population and society has crumbled. There's just a very few small slices of humanity left and a few pockets of people left. And that's what the plot is. But what it's really about is two young men that are both very alone in their own separate ways, that happen to find each other and come together and fall in love while at the same time kind of dealing with their all the trauma that they've dealt with related to the apocalypse and just related to losing loved ones. But it's mostly, I would say, a happy and uplifting story, despite the
Yeah,
heavy undertones and a lot of things. I really I kind of dubbed it "The Last of Us" meets Heartstopper, and so I really wanted to
yeah,
tune into those happy, cozy vibes, despite everything that was around them. So,
yeah. That's such an apt description of your book. Um, so I have a question, and I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but it's something that occurred to me several times as I was reading it. There's a viral apocalypse, and as gay men, we've sort of now dealt with two of them in our lifetimes, depending on your age. I don't know who's watching this, but like my coming out was through the AIDS crisis. AIDS was just it was the gay plague, and it didn't even have a name yet. When I was just coming into like, oh, I think I like men. um, and then losing so many people, and then of course COVID more recently, and losing a lot of people more broadly, not specific to the gay community. And I think that left some trauma, some scars that makes intimacy and love and trusting that if I give myself to you, if I open myself to you, that eh, like after enduring real heartbreak and loss, it's hard to do that. And I think collectively, we as gay men do that. I'm wondering if you chose a viral apocalypse as something gay men could uniquely relate to and the trauma that results from that, or if it was just like, oh, that's a cool plot point, because
well,
it really worked for me.
yeah, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't actually thought a lot about, and that kind of speaks to how how happy I am that younger gay men now don't have to go through the horrors that people yours and my age went through, dealing with the AIDS crisis and just the real fear of, especially in the early days of the unknown. But no, but that wasn't the motivation. Honestly, like the real motivation was COVID. I kind of conceived of the core story. I've always loved apocalypse stories. My whole
Yeah.
life, I've just been drawn to the kind of the starkness and the collapse of society and how it impacts people. But it was really in the doldrums of COVID in the 2000s and the 2020s when I really conceived of this story. And I was like, what if this was way worse? Like, how like just a couple gene, DNA strand changes, and we could end up something really, really horrible. But it was also just like each of our own isolation and loneliness and thinking about that and how it impacted everybody so much.
Mm.
That was the real impetus and inspiration for the story. So.
Yeah. Um, so again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, so I'm gonna ask sort of generic questions, and then you can answer
Sure.
with as much detail as you feel is appropriate. How's that?
Sounds great.
It's interesting in the post-apocalyptic world how many queer people survived, and I
Yeah,
and I like that. I don't want to say too much, but that one of the villains of the story is queer, is
yeah,
gay. I
yeah.
don't know how he would identify exactly, but he's definitely not fully straight, put it that way. And I'm
Sure.
wondering, and I like that because I think another trope that you see is the gay men are always the victim, and here we've got like the two gay heroes or protagonists paired up against a gay villain.
A gay
Like,
villain, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's funny you should mention that. I had one or two beta readers that were like, why is everyone gay in this story? Um, but and I was worried for a minute. I'm like, maybe and they're not all gay. I mean, it's a pretty
yeah,
sparse cast. There's not a lot of people in it, but the kind of the main people identify somewhere on the rainbow spectrum. Um, uh, I hardly ever identify people, honestly. I let people kind of be defined more based on their actions. I think I probably only
yeah.
use the word gay like 3 times in the whole book. Um, but I talked to other people about that, and like my editor, I think said it best, and they were like, you know, straight people are in all the books all the time, and nobody ever says anything about it. So I think it's great that we have a kind of a gay character dominated story. So nothing wrong with that at all. And
I
after they said
loved
that,
it.
I'm
I thought it
okay.
was great.
Yeah,
If I were one of your test readers,
yeah,
um, I'm curious what the response has been to the book. I mean, in terms of, I guess that could come on two levels. I love the story. I sort of fell in love with the two protagonists in the book, both for different reasons. They're both very different, but very complementary. Um, it, but then there's the underlevel, and let me preface this with a, a story about a friend of mine, an older man that came out later, much later in life, in his late 50s. And the thing that inspired it was he's a voracious reader, and he wrote just general books of all different kinds. And he read the book Call Me by Your Name, and he was so deeply moved by it. This fiction book, that they went on to make a movie about, um, that it inspired him to come out. Like, it was like a major, major turning point in his life. And I'm wondering if you've received any feedback like that, or
yeah. Well, so uh, I guess the most equivalent to what you're saying. And so I wrote this for a couple different audiences, and one audience was for young queer youth um, who maybe were still in the closet and questioning and just wanted to see some normal characters. And what I mean by normal is characters who like aren't like where the sexuality isn't the dominant trait. They're just queer people living their best lives, as I often say. And I received a couple emails one in particular from this closeted lesbian girl who lived with her ultra religious family. And she thanked me so much for writing the story. And, I was just absolutely completely touched by this letter. Um, and, it was like completely validated exactly the reason why I wrote this, or one of the big
Yeah.
reasons why I wrote this story was to give people just good characters, good stories with people that are like them. So
How about, I'm curious, like, I know it's hard to tell from looking at me, but I am not a teenager. I'm a
yeah.
middle-aged man. It reminds me sort of when my mom, admittedly I did too, got into the Twilight books. And it's like there's some part of me that's like a 12-year-old girl living inside waiting to escape, fall in love with a vampire. Um, your book is much better written, by the way, than the Twilight books.
Oh,
Just saying.
oh,
I
thank you.
like the Twilight books. I like yours more. Um,
Hmm.
it's setting a pretty low bar, but um, no, I think that there is that audience of older people that read books that are called young adult YA books that
Yeah.
are really moved by them, even though they're stories about high school age kids. And I'm wondering, maybe for you personally or anybody you've talked to beyond me, that just found like, here's this cute story, this fun story, but yet something's shifting inside that feels really significant, even if you can't put your
Yeah.
finger on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so uh, I I had said like I wrote this story for multiple audiences, and I just focused on the uh,
Yeah.
the youth. But another huge audience is queer people, and even gay men of all ages. Um, I think one thing that happened for a lot of uh, you know queer people that were, as you mentioned, like grew up in before 2000s, really almost before like marriage equality, like really, because even in the 2000s, things were still not awesome. Have never been perfect. Obviously, things are still definitely not perfect, but they were much, much worse. And a lot of people were kind of robbed these key things in their childhood. Their
Mm.
first crushes were complicated, right? You're like, it was a period of time when you started realizing, oh, wow, I'm not doing what like most normal people expect me to do and what I see in the media. We didn't get to date. Like most of us were closeted through all of our school year, probably up until college. We didn't do prom. So there's a little bit of grieving that people need to do that not all of them have done, or maybe have not done as much. And it requires a lot of self-reflection and thinking about that. And so I certainly wrote this book as kind of a way to do that. And
Mm.
I felt the same thing when I saw Heartstopper. I've heard the term phantom nostalgia, which is basically people get this deep feeling of nostalgia watching something like Heartstopper, but it's not a real nostalgia because
Mm.
this didn't happen in our real lives, but it was something that should have happened and something that we felt so strongly that maybe dreamed about and imagined about. And so getting to look back at read a story about young people fulfilling these things that we wish we had, there's some a catharsis there that helps kind of can help heal and help
Yeah.
people process those thoughts and emotions. So
Yeah. Um, the a few questions first, and again, I don't want to give anything away, but I will say that the ending was a beautiful ending. I love the ending of the book, but it could
thank you.
also be um, a new chapter, like a sequel, is something that you could do, and it would feel very organic and not like a Hollywood sequel where they have to contrive some way of bringing people back from the dead or whatever. There's like the ending leaves itself open to. I wonder what happens from here. and I'm wondering
Yeah,
if there is a sequel in the works, or if they just have their ending and that's it,
yeah,
or you're not
it's an
sure.
interesting question. Well, I certainly, as you mentioned, left it open the possibility for a sequel. Um, I I Most of my books I've written so far have been standalone. It wasn't intended to be a sequel. Let me put it that way. So the story arc kind of concludes. Um, uh, but there's certainly potential, whether it's those same characters or different characters interweaved with them, or there's a lot of different possibilities. So I know a lot of my fans are begging for one. So it could possibly happen. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put in my vote for a sequel. Just saying.
Okay, great.
um, I'm curious about your writing process because I write nonfiction. I'm an author as well, but all of my books to date have been nonfiction about Eastern philosophy and stuff, like
Oh,
very different genre, different work. And I've kicked around the idea of writing fiction, and I've often wondered, and I suppose it would be different for each author, how much of you is in the various characters in the book.
yeah. Oh, definitely a lot. Um, I would say even more so in my second book, which I'll like we can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, there's no doubt that you put yourself into these stories. A lot of my beta readers are some of my friends. I have a gay book club, which about once a year I co-op and we read my book. Um, and people are laughing because I literally take situations out of my life and put them right into the book. There's a scene in the book where they're sitting by a campfire playing guitar, and we go camping all the time, and like those moments are literally taken from my own
Yeah,
experiences. But then even like the deeper aspects of the people's personalities, you draw some from your own trauma
yeah,
and your own core beliefs. So definitely, there's a lot of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, without giving anything away, was the I'll just say the tunnel of love, or what is it, the earthquake scene?
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
that
So
based on
there,
reality?
well, not an actual experience that I had, but
That's too bad.
yeah, I know it. Well, I'll have another story that I'll tell you in a second. But yeah, so the earthquake in fact, was a real ride for my childhood. So it's not uh, in the book. At one point, they're in an abandoned amusement park, which I think I even mentioned in my marketing materials. So no spoiler there. I've always loved amusement parks, so that was part of me,
Yeah,
drawing from one of my childhood loves. And I, to this day, remember that ride, and I describe it in the book. And so that ride did actually exist. It doesn't exist anymore, but it
yeah,
did. Um, Interestingly, I had a fan write a letter. Um, the amusement park in the book is based on an actual amusement park, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Um, but I had a fan uh, write me a letter saying she grew up in that area and was like, "Is that this amusement park?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh my God, I did not expect you know, the nostalgia ride that you took me on, because she had an experience like in the book, and she was like, I couldn't believe that you wrote about this. It
yeah,
was so that was a really fun fan letter to
yeah.
get. So
You know, when I was a kid, I used to go to Rocky Point amusement park. It was in Rhode Island, and it's long since closed. And they had a ski lift thing, and you could ride it up into the woods. And there was these big
oh yeah.
rocks, and I always wanted to jump off the ski lift onto the big rocks, and because it looked like there were caves to explore. But I was never
Hmm.
courageous enough to do it, and probably would have gotten arrested had I done it. But some YouTuber made a video about abandoned amusement parks, and he went to Rocky Point and actually went up, walked all the way up, and was exploring in the rocks. And I wrote to him, I'm like, oh my God, this has bothered me my whole life that I never saw what was under those rocks. So it was
You
just
were
this
probably
weird, like,
sorely disappointed.
It was actually pretty cool. I mean, I
Oh,
think
was
if
it? Okay, cool.
my like 8-year-old self, it would have been like magical. But
Oh, yeah. I just think
yeah,
like one of the things about amusement parks is that they're a facade, right? Like you see these elaborate, castles and buildings, and often you go inside behind them, and all you see is scaffolding and and
yeah,
baling wire and like paper mache and stuff like that. But
yeah.
yeah, anyway, that is fun.
Well, I want to go to this amusement park with you. I'll leave it at
Yeah,
that.
that
Um,
sounds great.
your upcoming book, which I haven't read, but I'm excited to, is called The Haunting Between Us. Just briefly before we go, what's this one about?
Yeah, no problem. So my theme, my through line for all my books is uh, gay boys in love. um, but what I like to do is rather than just tell a kind of a traditional contemporary story, I throw a genre at it. So in this case, the genre is haunted houses, which is also been a huge fan of mine. I love the spooky season. I love Halloween. Um, and so what I thought was, let's combine uh, a kind of a contemporary romance, young adult romance, with kind of a ghost story and a mystery, which is, things I love. I loved old Scooby-Doo episodes and just that theme and that kind of feel. And so that's definitely what this is. Compared to the first book, you could almost call this a contemporary book because it's set in modern day. It's kids in high school texting, dealing with bullying and social media and more family dynamics. So in a lot of senses, that's kind of, I mentioned that this is a little bit more of a personal story to me because like I put a lot of myself in these characters, and a lot of the things I dealt
Yeah.
with growing up. But it's also set in a spooky
Mm.
Victorian mansion, and there's ghosts that they have to deal with, and ghost hunting, and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm really excited.
Nice. I'm curious, how old are you?
Um, I'm over 40, let's put it that way.
Over 40. No, I'm just wondering if I was born in 71, and um, a lot of the things you're interested in, like the amusement parks, like the haunted stories, the post-apocalyptic world falling apart stuff, and I find that like my generation is really into that for some reason. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
um, anyway, Paul Michael Winters, pmwinters.com is your website. And of course, this will be in the show notes wherever you're viewing or listening to this episode. The book that is currently out is Together in a Broken World, and the upcoming book sometime in 2025. Do we have an exact date yet, or is it just
Yeah, I just announced the date, in fact, and ebook pre-orders are available. It's January 7th. So it'll be just at
nice?
the start of the new year. Yeah.
Excellent. Because I hate when they say coming in 2025 and it's like December 31st, 2025. The
Yeah.
Haunting Between Us, and I can't wait to read it. I will put links to that book, your current book, in the show notes as well, so people can check that out. And I highly, highly recommend it. If you would like to get more involved in the Q-MindBody community, we have a Facebook group where you can discuss whatever you like. And I post a lot of the episodes and content, and I will post links there as well. And we're also starting some online discussion groups and some online and in-person yoga classes with me at some point in the very near future. So keep an eye out for that. Links to everything in the show notes. Um, Paul Michael Winters, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me some really great entertainment that took me into a beautiful fictional world that was post-apocalyptic, super virus, but somehow still more fun and interesting than the one I'm living in. um,
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I'm glad you liked the story so much.
Thanks.